to make it harder and harder for women to terminate unwanted pregnancies and also to limit their access to many forms of contraception. Joining me now is contributing editor for Rolling Stone magazine, Janet Reitman. Janet, I said this to you before the segment began. This is one of the most important pieces I have read about women's health and reproductive freedoms and what is actually happening behind the scenes to restrict choice. So let's start first about the broad change in strategy from, as you write in the piece, the focus of being on the unborn to putting the focus on women and women's safety and health.
Right, women's health.
Tell us more about how that strategy, the iteration of that strategy.
Well, I think the thing is that the pro-life movement realized over the years that casting abortion as a matter of, fetal murder, was just a completely unsuccessful strategy, and it made them look kind of like extremists. It'd be waving like the bloody fetus pictures, and holding these massive rallies or blockading the clinics, and none of this really worked, and it just actually marginalized them, I believe. So what they, and actually according to some of these people, that is exactly what they felt. And so over the years, people who are looking at this from a more strategic level were thinking, well, how can we chip away at this at the state level? Yeah. And let's try to pass legislation that will restrict abortion, and will do so in a way that makes it seem like we're protecting women's health, and that's exactly what they've done.
And you point out in the, we talk about the safety issue, and you compare abortions to colonoscopies. The mortality rate for abortions is less than 0.67 per 100,000 procedures. For colonoscopies, it's 20 out of 100,000. You do not see a huge sort of anti-colonoscopy lobby. This is not about women's safety. This is about restricting choice. But this is not just a couple of sort of well-organized individuals. I mean, the most, I think, shocking part of the piece is the behind-the-scenes funding of organizations like the National Right to Life Committee and the Americans United for Life, AUL, which in terms of drafting this legislation are a lot like the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, which has been a huge driver in voter suppression laws and a host of other conservative principles. Tell us about how these groups operate.
They operate in much the same way that ALEC does. They write model legislation. They send this out to legislators across the country, state and federal. They attend ALEC conferences. People from the Americans United for Life go to ALEC conferences, and they don't present, but they do sort of pass out their literature, and they make this available to the people, to legislators who go. And many of those people, most of them in many regards, are pro-life anyway. And so these agendas are very much connected. And the thing is that, most reporters don't really cover this enough or know this enough to make these connections. But if you talk to enough people, specifically those who cover the religious right, they have been documenting the ways in which the religious right has formed a real union with the fiscal conservatives. And personally, I think that's the story. And this stealthy connection between the two. And
in the piece, I'll quote, you say, some abortion rights advocates have compared the Americans United for Life, AUL, to ALEC, the secret corporate-funded organization responsible for many of the country's voter suppression and stand your ground laws. Each year, AUL sends state and federal lawmakers across the country a 700-page-plus pro-life playbook, featuring a 50-state report card on the state of anti-abortion legislation, as well as a step-by-step guide to help lawmakers understand that Roe v. Wade doesn't preclude them from passing common-sense legislation. They have been incredibly effective in this. As you point out, again, in the piece, over the past 3 years, 205 abortion restrictions were enacted. That number just seems to be going up.
Yeah, it does, and I think that it's going to keep getting, you're going to, at least see these attempts in more and more states, and more of these attempts as we get closer and closer down the line. I mean, I think that 2014 will be interesting because this issue is now becoming a real issue for progressives, and I'm not the only journalist who have made these connections and have written stories like this. I mean, I think that more and more people are asking these questions and looking at this more closely, so we'll see what happens.
Just before we let you go, in terms of the response from progressives, do you sense that are there beginnings of organizations and sort of networking around this that can be a progressive pro-choice answer to what's happening in the religious conservative anti-choice world?
I mean, I'd like to say yes. I hope so. But I think that I think the real problem is funding, and I think they're just really massively outfunded. by the right, and in some ways they have an organizational structure on the right that is just it's bigger, and it's extremely targeted. And I just think the progressives are having to wake up to this very quickly and get themselves mobilized, and I hope they do.
Well, the first step to mobilization is awareness. Janet Reitman from Rolling Stone, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
And just a programming note, tomorrow's comedians Sarah Silverman and Liz Winstead will join me to discuss their project V to Shining V, a National Pride Day for Women. Do not miss that.